Bon matin! Bon, je suis vraiment étonnée parce que je m'attendais à vraiment beaucoup plus de monde selon le feedback que j'avais eu aujourd'hui. Puis on est un petit peu beaucoup moins qu'hier finalement. Alors, je voulais juste dire, si vous connaissez des gens qui sont déjà sur la liste d'attente, parce qu'il y avait une liste d'attente de 90 personnes, ce serait un peu triste de laisser la salle, la chance de participer au groupe de discussion non remplie. Alors, si vous avez des compatriotes, des collègues qui sont sur la liste d'attente, n'hésitez pas à leur texter, envoyer un petit texto. Ce matin, on a déjà discuté à la réception et ils vont pouvoir expliquer qu'il semble y avoir des places disponibles. Merci beaucoup d'être ici, tout le monde. Je parle vraiment pas longtemps parce qu'on a déjà du retard. On a déjà la réputation de commencer en retard, on dirait. Donc, le premier panel, c'est un panel qui me touche droit au cœur, parce que je suis avocate de formation. Et je vous présente sans tarder Carole Piovoisan, qui est avocate litigator, qui nous vient de Toronto aujourd'hui. Merci infiniment, Carole, d'être ici. Carole a géré tout un projet de recherche sur l'intelligence artificielle et le droit. Et une des citations qu'elle a écrite, est-ce que tu vas en parler dans ta présentation? Oui, alors je la laisse vous le dire et je vous présente sans tarder Carole Piovoisan.
In English, though I actually do speak French. It's just been a really long time since I've used it, and frankly, I'm just too shy. So excuse me as I address you in French, in English. Sorry, just 1 second. Oh. Is that that's not the right one? No.
And you know what? I did a big boo-boo. No, Carol, stay. That's okay. You are the first one to talk and present, but I forgot to introduce Christiane, who's going to be moderating the whole panel. I'm so sorry.
I'll let you take this.
I'm so good at this stuff, aren't I? Okay. I would like to introduce Christiane Sad. Christiane Sad is the co-director
of the Law Practice Program at the University of Ottawa.
On the University of Ottawa. And she came from Ottawa today to moderate this fascinating panel on AI and law. Thank you so much, Christiane.
So should we invite the panelists to take place?
If you like, one at a time or everybody together?
Well, you can have everybody together,
okay.
Please.
Off you go.
How can we switch it off, please? Because this will be the third one.
There's no representation.
The first one won't have any representation. Okay, so can we ask them? Okay, please can we turn this off, please, because the first panelist won't have a presentation. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so honored to be here today with you on this very important discussion about AI on a social mission. It's such a unique subject, and it's really an honor for me, and also to have this wonderful panel. It's such a relevant topic today. As you know, you had a wonderful day yesterday with all kind of perspective on AI and the impact that is having on society, on the industries, and everything in our daily lives. So technology, as you know, is advancing so fast. At some point, we can't keep up with all the information or to keep up with the need to stay on a human level and on a societal level. Today is about law, and we know I'm a lawyer too, and it's affecting also our profession, but today it's not about us. It's really about you, how you are involved and how you can be part of this and be a leader in the change that's needed to incorporate AI in an ethical, in a very human way. So as you know, as science and technology, and especially AI, is evolving, smart agents are deployed everywhere. And it's such a widespread development and deployment and at such a fast rate that will have profound ethical, psychological, social, economic, and legal consequence on the human society, and also on our planet, obviously. So people, and you know, are concerned about the effects on their jobs, on the competition, on society as a whole. So this is why today we gathered such an amazing panel to talk about these issues, about the legal and ethical aspects that relates to AI. As Carol will mention, legal and policy advisors are questioning and see how they can get involved, but also people developing these technologies and facing the consequences are also should be part of this discussion, and this is a great opportunity to do so today. In addition to I won't go into details to the report, the white paper that Carol and her team at McCarthy's wrote, but also other speakers such as Geneviève Ball, who was one of the speakers at AI Now Institute, had a very powerful question. She asked, is AI Australian? Is AI Buddhist or Christian? It's not about religion. It's really about defining who and what really is AI deep down, beyond the technology or the software or the algorithm. So without taking too much time, we know we have a lot of questions about liability of the AI systems that are being developed, about the jobs effect, and the shift that will take place into the workplace and in our jobs. So I'm glad to present the panelists. So we have Carole Pevosson, who's a litigation lawyer at McCarthy Tétrault in Toronto. And she's the co-author of the white paper called From Chatbots to Self-Driving Cars, the Legal Risk of Adopting Artificial Intelligence in Your Business. Although it mentions business, but everybody, even nonprofits, social, and everybody should read this white paper. It's so interesting, and it really highlights some of the questions that are asked today. And she will give us an overview about the law and AI and all the risks that are questioned today. Next, we have Kai-Sin Hung, who is an external collaborator with ITC-ILO. So basically, it's a UN labor standard organization that focuses on, but he focuses on technology at work initiative. And he studied a lot the AI effect on the workforce, on the employment. So that will be his focus. And then we have Karina Kisserwan, who is a lawyer specialized in indigenous rights and economic development projects. It's such a unique perspective that you will have here with this group of vulnerable, I can't say minority, but it's a very interesting point of view that you won't see any often. So without further ado, Carole, I will cede you the place.
So thank you again, and thank you for the invitation to come speak with you today. This is an unprecedented opportunity. I have not had the opportunity to speak in the context of a social mission, and I think this discussion is really important. So as has been said, I'm a litigation lawyer with McCarthy Tétrault. I'm developing a particular area of expertise with respect to AI and the law. I love the philosophical discussion about the law in the context of what could ultimately be an autonomous agent. I love the way there are reconceptualization of what we mean by a person, what that means for liability. Some of this exists now, and we're seeing certain companies hit up against it, and some of it doesn't. Some of it is hypothesizing into the future and wondering what could happen if what we believe is going to be the trend actually occurs. What does that mean for our laws? And do we need to preemptively prepare to make sure that we've got the systems in place, we've had the discussions, we've sort of walked in with our eyes wide open. And that's precisely what I propose to speak to you about today. It really is about the transformative nature, that is AI that is causing, in my view, a discussion about values and what we expect or want our society to look like. When we often talk about innovation, we talk about progress. But I don't know if that's necessarily fair. And the reason is because progress, by definition, connotes a destination. It is a movement towards a destination, which suggests that we know where we're going. With AI, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. In some cases, we do. So let's take the example of AI used in the medical context. We have a pretty good idea that, for instance, we want to eradicate death caused by cancer. And we have some suggestion that AI, we have evidence that AI can assist us in that regard, at least in certain respects. So in that respect, we do have a destination that we're going towards, and progress suggests that we're getting closer and closer to that goal. But otherwise, on a global scale, I don't know if we know where we're going with AI, if we assume its transformative nature will be as profound or if we accept that its transformative nature will be as profound as we assume. So rather than talking about progress, I think about change, that the technology is causing a change, and the nature of this change is not new. It's not the first time society has been changed by technology. It's just that it feels quite profound. And I have no doubt that my colleagues will touch on this far better than I can. But some of the questions around labor, around justice, around insurance, around medicine, where we see AI as being introduced or at least explored, the change can be quite profound. And so we need, in my view, to look introspectively. And now is a good time because it is close enough that we can see the change in the future, but we're not quite there yet. So an introspective view to really think about how this change is going to affect our values and how our values should affect the change. Again, coming back to the transformative nature of AI, when I thought about this, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about this over the last few days, and I was thinking, what makes it so transformative? And I guess fundamentally, and I really welcome this as part of a discussion. I think the group is intimate enough that we can do this in the discussion period, so please do challenge me on this point. But I think the transformative nature fundamentally comes down to the fact that this technology is replacing humans, and it is affecting humans in a way that can sort of define what we have access to. And particularly, I come back to sort of the criminal law context. I use this example all the time. I understand that Catherine Hume used this example as well yesterday, which is where you've got, for instance, a system that is guiding a judge to determine whether or not somebody should be let out on parole. Or I actually think a more concerning context is whether or not somebody should be granted bail. So just for context, at the bail stage, the person isn't accused, they are not convicted. There has been no trial, no determination. And to decide whether or not somebody should be granted liberty, which is a fundamental democratic value, versus withheld and sort of confined and remained in jail or in some detention facility, that's pretty fundamental. And I think coming back to this question of values, what is transformative about it is that it is something else that I can't see behind, I can't challenge, I can't ask questions to, that is informing my liberty rights on a fundamental level. And I want to know before it's used, do I agree with this? Do I think this is okay? So we have to walk in with our eyes wide open. We have to think about what are we giving up versus what we get. So I'm going to pause there just for a second to give you a little personal anecdote. I love convenience. I am desperate for anything that will make my life more convenient. And I am always surprised how quickly I am to consent to have my data used by God knows who for the purpose of convenience. I'm surprised that as a lawyer, a trained lawyer, I not once read the consent. I will admit this. I hope this part isn't taped. I not once read the consent because the value of convenience outweighs, in my mind, feels limited. Maybe if I had read the consent, I would actually know how my data is being used, but at first instance, it just feels limited, and so I'm willing to trade up my privacy interests for the convenience. And that's my decision, But as we think about technology used on a broader scale, we have to think as society, is that something we are willing to give into? So let me give the example. AI requires lots of data to train. This is trite. The more restricted our privacy laws are, the harder it is to succeed in innovation. So a company might be more inclined to head to a jurisdiction that has laxer privacy laws than to stay here where our privacy laws are more restrictive, thus their innovation will be hampered. We might decide that that's okay, that we're willing to trade off innovating, we're willing to trade off winning on the sort of global competition for innovation because our privacy interests are more important to us. But we have to have that discussion. Because the values that we have in our democracy, in our society, are very important to us. They define who we are, not only as a society, but as individual communities. So we need to think about what values, what rights, and what liberties we want to protect. We often, in our society, we are proud of and we expect transparency and accountability in our institutions. We don't always get it, but we certainly expect it. And when we don't get it, we want to challenge that. We protect individual liberties and rights. So we protect, for instance, the right to a fair trial. We protect self-determination. I mean, I think my friend speaking on Indigenous rights would probably challenge me on that, and I think she's fair to do so. But as a fundamental democratic value, we protect self-determination, and we protect values of diversity, at least we tout them, values of diversity and inclusion. So when you think about how you're introducing AI, or how you might think of regulating AI, it is fundamental that you've got to go back to those initial principles, which is, what are we protecting? What are we valuing? What do we as a society want to prioritize over something else? And what are we prepared to give up? In that respect, we really do need to think about the types of systems that we create, and we need to think about how the systems are being used and how they're being developed. We also have to think about what impact they will have and who has to be at the table to help inform those discussions. So if the discussions are going to be held in governments or in academic institutions or at think tanks, then do we have all the right players there to make sure that there is an even distribution of the benefits as well as the costs of AI? If they're going to happen in forums like this, then we need to make sure that this voice is heard at a policy level so that it is influencing the ultimate decisions on standards, on regulations, and on funding investments. If we decide that we want a set of standards that will fundamentally change or adapt our society, then we need to have that discussion and we need to move the dial forward on that. I'm mindful of my time, but I want to leave you with this one point. This is important, and it's important because you are innovators, you are policy influencers, you are academics, you are bloggers and writers, you're at various conferences. And it is important because this can, and in my view, it probably will, change the way our society looks in time. That's not a bad thing. It's just a call to action for you to become informed and get involved in the discussion. And I think and I hope that the discussion will start this morning. Thank you very much.
Ah non, ah oui, vous avez fait l'ordre, excuse. Je me mêle pas de rien, moi.
Much for inviting myself to this panel and with my esteemed colleagues here. So I have a lot to learn from you guys. And let me begin. I'm not a lawyer, but I can try to give my 2 cents on regulatory issues that I think we need to consider, okay? So one of the great uncertainties around AI is how it will impact the world of work. For example, here, This is a masterpiece by Picasso called the Large Bather. And I actually have a print of this sitting in my living room. I know, it might be bad taste, I don't know, I don't care. But what is important is, when I try to upload this online, the algorithms at Facebook and YouTube actually cannot decipher whether if this is fine arts or pornography. So social media companies, they hire these commercial content moderators to do the job, to act as digital trash removers, okay, when their own AI and algorithms cannot do that job. So right now, we estimate that there are about 100,000 content moderators around the world. Then they often work 10 hours or more a day in poor working conditions at low pay. And of course, they're sifting through graphic and violent images, videos, and text. So one can imagine, this takes its toll on the individuals, both on the psychological level, but also many of them have report conditions that amount to depression and also paranoia. Okay? So this is just one way of how AI is impacting the world of work that I think has immense societal and regulatory implications. So a bit about myself. I'm Kai, and I help co-manage the Tech at Work initiative at the International Training Center of the International Labor Organization, which is the training arm of that organization. So the Tech at Work initiative is a supporting platform of this Future of Work Centenary Initiative, which is the centerpiece of various initiatives at the International Labor Organization that is going to be celebrating the 100th anniversary next year in 2019. And also, the critical part is we're trying to see what the next 100 years of work will look like as well. And of course, the view that I express on this panel are on my own and does not reflect that of my center or the organization, okay? So for myself, why is AI important? Why do we need AI? I think AI have the potential to help us solve environmental, societal, and economic problems that are too complex for us to solve by ourselves. So this includes the future of work, and then how, where the jobs of the future will be coming from, but also asking the question in what condition. And secondly, AI can help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So these are the 17 goals that the global community have agreed to say, by 2030, we're going to aim for these, right? And then this also includes our very own country, Canada. And a part of this is SDG 8, Goal 8, on providing decent jobs for all and fostering or the promotion of inclusive and sustainable economic growth. So AI's ability to recognize patterns, give us new insights, and optimize processes is also enabling or facilitating the disruption of the organization of work and production, okay? So we're talking about how things are organized around us in our economy. So we're seeing that AI is enabling disruptions in the formation of new economies and business models. So some example of this is in e-retailing, as well as in the sharing economy, which is quite booming, and it's actually growing at a faster rate now. A second way that AI is disrupting our world of work is through the formation and changing the very nature of work. So we're seeing that the quality of work is shifting, and also there are new forms of work, but also we ask in what condition. Lastly, AI is changing how we prepare and also anticipate the jobs of the future as well. And this is a big topic that you can feel free to ask me at the Q&A. So let's delve into this a bit more. So we're seeing some of the changes in the nature of work that is shifting. What does this look like? So the formation of new forms of work in the gig economy, for example, often we call these digital labor. So this is similar to the type of work that these content moderators would be doing in my very first example. Often these jobs, they offer more flexibility, that's a good thing, but also they are more insecure and precarious. And this is part of a global trend that's quite concerning of the casualization of the worker. So this means that workers are becoming more disposable. And this is also, we're seeing the fundamental shift in the fundamental rights of the worker and the responsibilities for the employee away from the employer. And this is the essential debate when we look at Uber and its Uber drivers around the world, okay? And secondly, another way that AI is facilitating disruption is in the formation of new economies and also business models. So one example of this that I think that we need to really talk about is the winner-take-all economy. And I think Benjil yesterday referenced this too. So a key aspect of this winner-take-all economy is the concentration of digital power in the hands of a few AI giants, like the ones that we like to think about, Google, Facebook, Amazon. And this concentration is widening inequality and increasing income or wage disparities around the world. So in 2015, Google actually captured half of the global online advertising revenue, okay? And that for me is quite concerning. And then its next biggest competitor only captured 8%. So because of their size and also their first mover advantage, because they were there first, often they can distort the market very easily, and also they can essentially buy out competitors, okay, to keep their place. So some might ask how we can best mitigate this. Should we reinforce current regulations, or should we update current antitrust laws or our taxation code to make sure that this does not continue, which is already taking place, right? We're seeing these being played out. So more broadly, and also moving forward, I think we need more public dialogue, broad-based public dialogue about what type of future do we want, but in a sense of we need to make sure that the fundamental rights of the worker are protected. At the same time, we mitigate the risk of the formation of the winner-take-all economy. Okay, so the fundamental question, how can AI help? Well, AI take away jobs. Well, most likely not in the sense that we think about in the mass media. So looking at historical evidence, the fear of mass unemployment due to technological change has proven to be unfounded, right? And this is doing massive literature reviews and doing evolutionary economics, saying what is the trend, right? And this is because technology does not itself, it does not eliminate occupations, but it changes how the way that we perform and do these tasks. And of course, the jobs are going to be replaced by AI will be offset by the new ones being created in the medium and long term. And some of the data that came out yesterday actually says that by 2020, 1.7 million jobs will be replaced by AI, but 2.7 will be produced, right? And then that's like at a net level. So that's a good thing. But also these numbers are very hard to, there's so many predictions, but that's one that I want to leave you with. So how do we make sure that the dividends of AI is shared more broadly? One way, and I think this is one of the key messages that I want to leave with you, is to make sure that when we apply and we design artificial intelligence-enabled processes and new business models and workflows, that it complements that of human labor. Okay, and this is critical to ensure that the dividends are shared broadly. And then these dividends are critical in the sense of if we don't want Luddite-like resistance to AI, we need to make sure that everyone is part of this gain. Secondly, AI can help us with better labor market information, right? And this is going to be critical when we want to have better anticipation and information on where will the future job market look like and what type of competencies and knowledge we need to have. At the same time, when we look at the rapid rate of automation and the advancements in AI, what we acquire right now has knowledge and competencies will become obsolete faster. So this will actually become even more critical to get this right. So I want to leave you with these three kind of overall policy key messages. First, AI is here to help us solve some of our global and local problems that are too difficult to solve by ourselves, right? Such as the Sustainable Development Goals and how we can reach them. Second, we need more broad-based discussions on what type of future of work do we want and what type of society we want, right? And of course, we need to think about who is being left behind and what type of exploitation, especially on these digital labor that are newly being formed, and just the shape of it and the form and describing it. But now we need to talk about what to do with that. And of course, prevent the formation of this winner-take-all economy, which is already taking place. Lastly, the dividends of AI must be shared broadly. One way to do this is to ensure that workers and AI-enabled business models and workflows they complement. And of course, the question is, how do we do that? I don't know, but think about that, okay? No. So these are the three takeaway messages that I want to leave with you guys. And I'll end with this. Technology does not determine our future. Together, we must imagine and give shape to the future of work we want. And this is very powerful because looking at history, technology and the idea of technological determinism, it should not drive our conversation, okay? It should be us who's saying, no, we want the future of work we actually aspire to, and begin with that, and we move backwards. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Hello. So my work is to accompany indigenous communities, organizations, and businesses in finding solutions to the challenges they face in a variety of sectors: transportation, culture, health, human resources, and many of the projects that you are working on could be great help with these challenges. And I look forward discussing with you how they can be adapted to this particular context. The needs and perspective of indigenous peoples are very varied. In Quebec alone, we have 11 different nations. In my presentation today, I will quickly mention two of them: the Inuit that are in Nunavik on the northern part of the map, represented by the little igloos, and the Innu that are the gray circles on the north coast. But beyond the application of AI to indigenous communities, which is very important to get the community's input on, what I want to talk to you about today is the important contribution of indigenous perspective in developing AI and also developing policies around AI. And right now, some of you might be thinking, are indigenous languages equipped to talk about technology? We know that the Inuit have over 50 words to describe the concept of snow. But is the traditional language adapted to talk about AI? I want to share with you one of my favorite words in Inuktitut. And this word is Iktsorpuk. Now, what this word means is this feeling of anticipation that leads you to keep looking outside to see if anyone is coming. Now, doesn't the concept explain perfectly our tendency to continuously look on our phones to see if we have a new message or an interesting update? When I first started my law firm, I had a chance to work with this amazing, talented Innu lawyer, Alexa McKenzie. So Alexa is Innu. Her parents are her mother is from Washat Malitanam community, and her father is from Matimekash, like John community. And so Alexa's first language is Innu. And then on top of English and French, she also speaks Spanish and Italian. She is very interested in cultures and languages. Unfortunately for my firm, Alexa decided a few years ago to leave Montreal to pursue other challenges. And around the same moment, this other Alexa entered my life. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, so this is an Amazon Echo. And what it does, it responds to wake word Alexa. And I am most lucky with asking it to turn on the lights and tell me a joke. But I discovered that it is much less effective with Alexa, make a list of all relevant jurisprudence, or Alexa, write me a legal memo, than the lawyer Alexa. And recently, I've been learning the Innu language. And in Innu language, like in a number of other indigenous languages in Canada, there are two genders. Now, when we talk about two genders, you know, in a lot of our languages, the two genders are male and female. So, for example, in French, there would be un arbre, male, and une table, female. But in Innu, the two genders are animate and inanimate. So, something that's alive and something that is not alive. So, for example, the tree would be animate, but the table would be inanimate. And so I asked Alexa, the lawyer, whether Alexa, the AI, would in Innu be an animate or an inanimate word? And her answer was, well, it depends. It depends how you interact with it. If you are talking to your Alexa and you expect an answer back, then it is animate. But if you just transport the physical device around, then it's inanimate. As opposed, for example, for an animal, which no matter how you interact with it, will remain animate. So words, I believe, are very important because the words really describe our reality and they help us express our values as well. And when we speak about the future of AI, this is particularly important. Christiane mentioned earlier a quote from Geneviève Ball, who asked this question about AI's values, and she asked, is AI Australian, is AI Buddhist or Christian? What if we ask the AI that question? What would the AI say? And I actually found an answer to that question in a book by an Indigenous Canadian writer. So the book is called Take Us to Your Chief. And this is a book by Drew Hayden-Taylor, who is an award-winning playwright, novelist, scriptwriter, journalist from the Curve Lake First Nation in Central Ontario. So this is a book of short science fiction stories with an Indigenous twist. So in one of the stories, there is an AI that is created in a lab. It lives in a computer. And the AI is learning about the world. And it realizes that it doesn't want to be Christian or Buddhist because according to those system of beliefs, it wouldn't have a soul. And so it explores the possibility of becoming Aboriginal. And this is the AI talking about why it wants to be Aboriginal, saying many Aboriginal cultures believe that all things are alive, that everything on this planet has a spirit. They're much more inclusive than Christianity or Islam or most other religions. They would believe I have a spirit, and that's comforting. Now, having a spirit and being alive doesn't mean that we're saying that AI is human. There's a difference. And that is actually explored by another writer from across the globe, Ambeline Koimalina, who is a Paliku novelist and illustrator, but she's also a professor of law at the University of Western Australia. So she is an author of a series of adult science fiction, young adult, speculative fiction trilogy, The Tribe, and so she follows around in those stories an indigenous protagonists in a future version of Earth. And in a blog post, she was talking about how she asked herself whether her indigenous character would think of an AI in her story as of a human being. And then she comes to the conclusion that the question in itself is irrelevant, because it's really the Western ways of looking at life and philosophies that put human life above any other kind of life, but that in the indigenous cultures, it doesn't matter if you're human as long as you're alive. So she says in the Paliku kinship system, like in the kin system of other Aboriginal nations, recognize the connection between all life. It doesn't mean that you're not also my brother, my sister, mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather. Human is not a fixed category across greater cycles of existence. So that gives us an interesting perspective on AI. Well, let me tell you about another important concept in a lot of indigenous philosophies, because right now you might be thinking, well, maybe you're going too far into the future considering whether AI is alive or not, or human or not. We are not quite there yet. And so one of the concept you might heard of is the concept of 7 generations. And so this comes from the great law of the Iroquois that teaches us to look at decisions we have to make and look at the consequences that those decisions will have to 7 generations of our children, so around 140 years into the future, if we speak of human generation. It is often talked about in the concept of sustainable development and our effects on the environment. But I also think we can take this concept when we think about the policies we make around AI. And if 7 generations of human life sounds like too far into the future for you, well, maybe at least we should consider 7 generations of technology. That would already be an improvement on lawyers who are usually thinking about legislation things that are in the past, about 2 years behind. If they're 1 year ahead, will already be a great improvement. So even though AI is in its infancy now, we might think what AI 7.0 would look like. Will it be alive? Will it have a soul? How will we treat it as it grows and becomes more sophisticated? And will we allow it to make its own choices, like choosing its own religion? And let me tell you how that stories end about that artificial intelligence that chooses to be Aboriginal. So as it learns about the history and the reality of Indigenous peoples in Canada, it becomes very sad and feels guilty. And eventually, it decides to cease to exist in the world where such things are possible. So maybe artificial intelligence can help us to become better humans. And perhaps integrating Indigenous perspectives in making IA will help us achieve that goal. And maybe analyzing whether IA is alive or not and wondering how we will treat it might force us to reflect on how we should treat each other. Chinishkamitin, so this means thank you in Innu. But what it actually means is, I give you a goose. which is a visual image of giving something to the person you are thanking. Because Indigenous languages are very connected to this land and rooted in physical reality. And perhaps we need to reintroduce some reality in our world that is becoming more and more virtual.
Wow, what a panel. Since we're running a little bit behind, I'm going to open the floor, the question to you right away before questioning myself. By myself. I don't. Do you have a microphone on the You have? Okay. So any questions for our panelists?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much. Coming back to your presentation, Kai, you were mentioning the need to continuously educate the workforce. And concerning the divide between developed and developing economies, how do you see the role of improved vocational training and the public-private partnership that could exist between the private sector and the public in continuously updating the curriculum to ensure that the maximum amount of young people entering the workforce are equipped?
Can we take several questions so I can have time to respond in a proper way? Yeah. Okay.
Talking, I can't remember when we go, if we go, I don't need a mic, who might we actually meet? You were talking about the impact on work, and then so you said we'll talk about it a little bit later, and I was really curious, and I can't remember exactly what it was. You said that we were going to bring that up in the question period.
Yeah, so how AI is transforming how we prepare and anticipate for the jobs of the future, right? And then, which is nicely tied to your question. Thank you very much. So I think here, when we talk about dividends and when we talk about the role of education, and we tie this to the question of the digital divide, the question looks very different when we look at developing and developed countries, right? So part of this future work centenary initiative, we have done 130 national dialogues, right? So about 2/3 of the global member countries of saying, what type of future work do you see? And yes, the role of technical and vocational education training is critical, but the role of having, so I think the position, okay, of the International Labor Organization is the critical ingredient is to have social dialogue, right? So I mentioned about broad-based public discussions, but so we need to bring together employers, enterprises, the private sector, workers, trade unions, and governments, but also new players, including universities, vocational colleges, and say, where is the future going to be going? And then how do we complement and also prepare the incoming youth who are entering the labor market? So part of this is first social dialogue, but also labor market information, right? And that's where we can complement information from different data sets that are not right now aligned and say, how do we better prepare for this? So that's one quick answer. It's not an easy one, okay? Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes?
I have a big voice. My question is about, it's to Catherine. How do you envision the future of, the future of our judiciary system in Canada the next 10, 20 years? Can we imagine having, let's say, a judge which is a AI persona? Like we have Alexa right now, Siri. Could we see that in the future?
I think so. So the law is one of the professions that is considered to be vulnerable to artificial intelligence because a lot of what we do, particularly at the more junior levels, is quite rote, meaning it is ripe for automation. So my thing has always been, well, no problem, I'm a litigator. All I have to do is get before a judge, and you can't get a robot to do that, can you? And then I stop and I think, well, unless the adjudicator is a robot, in which case I'm useless. I'm not that helpful. So your question about, into the future, can we anticipate that there would be much more automation such that you won't actually, the way we operate in the judiciary is very different? And the short answer to that is yes. So currently in Quebec and in BC, we already have online dispute resolution, which means, you know, for certain types of claims, you can submit your argument, you can submit your documents, and then there is an online determination of your claim. They're simple claims, but they're just for now. Ontario has been exploring this option as well, but we haven't quite moved in that direction yet, but I can see that happening in the next little while. So we're already getting there. We're already starting. And I can see there being a move in that direction because not you know, a year ago, we had a Supreme Court decision that said, and this is R.V. Jordan, that said that the current wait times for trials is too long. We need to move the system ahead. We need to become more efficient. And so I see a role for technology in that respect. Will we become fully automated? Law moves slowly, and there's good reason for that in some cases, because there are checks and balances, there is accountability, there are interests at stake. So law does move slowly, but there is, the legal profession is alive to these changes and to the potential efficiencies, and they're slowly starting to incorporate some of those into both the practice of law and into adjudication.
And I have a follow-up question on that. Do you think the public is ready to put their faith, for example, into the hands of robots and artificial intelligence?
I think that depends on what they're, in what context. So I think if it's a small claims court context, a claim under $5,000, it's, in Quebec, it's usually retail disputes, then yeah, I think the time it takes to adjudicate a matter in the traditional system is lengthy and it's expensive. So in that case, I think some people are willing to trade off, as I talked about. They're willing to say, I might not get it, it might not be perfect, but it'll be faster, it'll be cheaper, and I'll get my answer, and I'll live with it. In other cases that are more complex, where the stakes are higher, I don't think so. I don't think we're there yet. But I do, like I said, I do see a movement in that direction, and I see it both from the side of lawyers, but I also see it on the side of judges, how technology can make their role more efficient and can assist judges in adjudicating more rapidly.
Okay. Thank you, Carol. I don't know if anybody else on the panel would like to add, because we still have 1 minute, unfortunately, but we will keep the discussion afterwards with the groups. Would you like to add something, Kai or Karina?
Yes. It's on? Okay. Well, I really agree about that. And I think what AI can do for law is to make law more accessible by making it faster, by making it less expensive. And a lot of lawyers feel that they're threatened by technology because, you know, they tend to feel that technology will take the jobs. But the way I see it is technology might take the less interesting part of our jobs, which is, you know, research and maybe writing some arguments, and which allows us to really focus on the important things such as justice. How do we interact with the clients? How do we serve the population, small businesses, individuals, and how we can help solve conflicts, prevent conflicts, and also, you know, we talk a lot about the system of a judge deciding, because the way we see resolving conflict is taking it to an impartial third party that will make a decision. But maybe what technology can do is help us make a better decision by negotiation and consensus also.
Thank you, Karina. One last word.
So I think in terms of like AI replacing lawyers and judges, I think, okay, so it's important to think about AI has a potential to be a liberating technology in a sense that it can do the 3Ds, right? The dull, dirty, and dangerous jobs. And then those are great. And yeah, like you mentioned, some of the more junior partners, they will often have to kind of sift through some of the heavier content, and then that can be automated. But in terms of how can the profession itself transform, you know, when we look at the introduction of ATMs in the banking industry, it did not destroy the economy of the financial sector. It actually transforms it. So it is becoming more and more relationship-based, right? So they can have more relationship-based like client experience. So most likely, law will go towards that side. And I think something that I want to leave with you guys, if we are thinking about artificial intelligence and this fourth industrial revolution, and I shared this with some of you yesterday, is saying, you know, the revolution itself isn't about technology, because for the past 300-400 years when we did our analysis, is we've been modeling human society and ourselves after machines, right? So we have Fordism, blah, blah, blah. But what is important right now, when machines can become machines through artificial intelligence, then humans have to learn how to become humans again. And gaining that is going to be critical. So it feels like gender, anthropology, sociology, justice, right? And how we work, those are be transformational.
Thank you, Kai. Join me to a warm thank you for all of you. Unfortunately, we don't have any more time for questions on this panel, but please join us on the discussion groups later today. And thank you again. So see you soon.
Panel, Betty. Ah, there we are. Betty. I would like to introduce Betty Ferreira, who is coming from Toronto as well today. Betty is trained as an accountant, but she started a company, how long ago was that? Restructure? 2005. And she helps nonprofits restructure, and I'll let you explain more of this. She does amazing work, and she's going to be moderating the next panel, which is data on a social mission.
Okay, so I hope all of our panelists are here today. Jonathan, Tina, Jean-Louis, Leslie, if we can ask you to come on up. Well, you never know. All right, I'll just great. I'll just, what I did is I have if we have time to get to it. I'm going to bring them up as examples. We're going to do it towards the end. Yeah, and I'll slip it here. One more. We spoke only on the phone, so now we're actually meeting each other in person. Hi. Yes, we're a little early. Okay, great. Wonderful. So I think we can all agree that the allure of technology to tip the scales, rewrite the future, and to break vicious cycles is tantalizing, for sure. But it's also very overwhelming for not-for-profits and governments working with not-for-profits who are just getting into this space. So what this panel would like to do today is be very pragmatic, give some tips, some words of advice for those of you that are nonprofits and governments working with nonprofits to get into this area and to grow in this area with more confidence and with a stronger footing. So to that end, I'd like to introduce our panel. And I have to say their bios were very long and extremely impressive. So I'm just going to actually say their names and their titles and let their intelligence come through in the discussion. How's that? Okay, so if you could just raise your hand as I go through your name. So Jonathan Bouchard, Director Data Analytics and Insights at Sun Life Financial. Leslie Chung, Partnership Development Director at Powered by Data. Jean-Louis Landry, Social Entrepreneur and Executive Director at Open North. And Tina Groves, Portfolio Strategy and Strategic Insights at IBM and she's also the Ottawa co-chair at Data for Good. So welcome the panel, please. Great, so we're going to start with some building blocks, Jonathan, and I'd like for you to actually let's just describe and summarize what the building blocks in AI are specific to descriptive, predictive, and, did I say that in the right order? Descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. Did I say the same thing twice there? I'm not sure. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Hello. Is it working? Yes? Okay, good. Hello, everyone. So let's start with these blocks. You mentioned 3, but actually there's more. I can go in details. But it's important to understand that you can put that on a timeline. So you have the past, you have the now, you have the future. So when we're saying descriptive or diagnostic, it's about the past, looking at the past, looking into your data, what happened. And what happened is the descriptive. So what happened in my past, what happened with my numbers, etc. So reporting, doing BI reporting is mostly about that. So that's the base, the foundation, building your history of data, etc. So that's the base. After that, you can also look into the past and diagnose why some stuff happened, why it happens. So maybe a drop in your numbers, etc. What happens? So you have to have an analytical mind a bit to look into the numbers and find why it happens. So this is for the past. After that, you're gonna have the future, which is predictive and descriptive. Predictive and prescriptive. So that's the nuance here. So predictive is like predicting the future. What are the chance, the probability of something happen? So I don't know. What's the chance of my customer to come back, for example, or that my customer will leave? It's something that you can apply to, in many cases, even on non-profit organization. Let's say, what's the chance that my donors will give again in the future? And after that, you have the prescriptive, which is it's going to happen, but what should I do next? So it's think a bit more about, because when we're saying predictive modeling or predicting the future, it's only about a number from 0 to 1. Seriously, and it's only about that. So what are the chances too, but how can I influence this future or this prediction? That will be the future. And when we're talking about artificial intelligence, is more an interaction. So it's more related to the now, because imagine if your artificial intelligence will give you an answer in 1 month. Doesn't make any sense, no? But it's based on the future and the past as well. So you put all the data together, your combination of both, let's say, and now you can have a real-time something, a real-time machine learning that will learn from everything that it learned from the past, and now it's interacting with you, and it will continue to learn. So I will stop there, and maybe my other friends will take the ball.
Well, let me just go a little further with you. So obviously, this highlights the importance of data quality, right? Because it's almost like we have several steps there. We have to get the foundation right. So what is data quality, and how do not-for-profits achieve that?
I continue?
Yes.
Okay. So it's funny. I've been working with nonprofit organization all my life. So I start my career as a volunteer in South America and Africa. And data quality, it's mostly an issue in every nonprofit organization I've been part of. Why? Because data literacy and the importance of data when we are capturing data, etc., it's not well understood. People doesn't get the value sometimes of the importance of the data. So most of the time I do data cleansing, and probably some of my colleagues too. So it's funny because I will say maybe 90% of nonprofit organizations use Access or Excel, even worse. So as an analyst, I will go through this and try to understand why they put this into this field, because you can have a beautiful name, let's say address, and you're going to have comments into the address. So that's the basic. Data quality is the basic of everything that I've been talking about, descriptive to prescriptive or AI. You really need to have the foundation. And when we're saying foundation, think about a house. You need really to put the fundamentals there, and the foundation needs to be strong and well built, because it will allow and unlock everything that could be possible to do with data. You're going to have the value from that.
Jean-Louis, yes, please jump in, and I hope you will also address some of the skills that are required.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Jonathan already mentioned some key concepts here around data quality, as well as data literacy. And I think one of the big challenges that the nonprofit fit has to confront is really kind of data literacy, but the challenges of the future. So it's not data literacy about, like, yes, you have to be able to manage data more effectively and to be able to have the quality that you need to have your data life cycle, that works well. But I'm more concerned about algorithmic literacy for the nonprofit sector, for example. So I'm worried that we're spending a lot of time trying to transform the sector from a data literacy perspective, where we're trying to focus on challenges of kind of like yesterday, but that are still crucial, but that we need to actually leapfrog in a very kind of ambitious way and develop new skill set to look at algorithmic transparency and algorithmic kind of monitoring in ways that are multi-sectorial. And it's great to follow on a panel that was run by lawyers, because you kind of help set kind of the terms of these types of conversations, which are very, very critical and evolving at the moment. And one example that I can point to, if I may, is things that are happening in kind of regulation around algorithmic transparency at the City of New York. So City of New York, obviously, an ambitious kind of smart city, maybe not the most innovative, frankly. Like, we do a lot of work in terms of documenting smart cities around the world. We work with like 20 different cities, but they go big because it's New York City, right? And so one of the things that New York has going for it is 8 different laws that have an impact on openness and open data. And just recently, it put together a task force that's multi-sectorial to ask these type of ethical questions. So that task force then comprised of lawyers and data analysts, but also nonprofits, and also folks from local government and different sectors and business, to be able to look critically at who is creating the algorithms, what's the data quality, where is it coming from, how does it insert biases into types of decision making from a predictive analysis that will then have an impact on the well-being and the design and administration of public services. So algorithmic transparency and algorithmic literacy, to me, is really where the nonprofit sector ought to be focused on. But at the moment, it's obviously very, very focused on the basics of data literacy. And I know Leslie probably has a lot to say about transforming the sector.
Pass the mic down to Leslie, because we're going to go to her next. I have a couple questions for Leslie, but did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it'll lead in probably into your follow-up question. So I guess, yes, data quality is important. We should definitely talk about that. How do nonprofits manage data? But I think I want to so we're talking about, we can call it whatever we want, descriptive, predictive, prescriptive, written down. And I would say that most of this is actually not possible in most of the nonprofit sector. So, there's maybe there's a few exceptions. There's some large, high-capacity nonprofits, but most people are collecting it in a spreadsheet, and they're figuring out who their clients are and where they live and other things like that. And so in order to do things that this conference is talking about in terms of machine learning with AI, or even like regression and predictive modeling, is probably not even possible for 3 main reasons. So the first is that nonprofits don't actually have access to results of their work. So for example, if I'm an after-school program and I want to know whether or not the kid that I had in 5 years ago, whether or not they've now graduated high school, I have to track that person down. The likelihood of me finding them after they've moved 3 times, or just they did 1 time participation in my program, it's a lot of energy to go and try and find that person. This could be, if someone participated in my employment program, did they find a job, and how much are they making now, and is it in their field? How am I gonna find that person? I, as a nonprofit, do not have the capacity to do that, and it's very difficult for me to find that information. And so in order to do things like these predictive modeling and prescriptive modeling, which I don't know that much about, a little bit about machine learning. We need to know those results. We need to know positive or negative. Did they do this or did they do that? And really all what we need to know those outcomes, and really what we get a lot of in nonprofits is outputs. So did they like my program? Did they finish my program? How many of them finished my program? Things like that. The second reason would be that they just don't have enough, they don't have enough data for some of this. They have that spreadsheet. And this is combined with the third reason in that they don't actually have that many clients. Like I said, there are exceptions, there are large nonprofits, but that in most cases, an after-school program is serving, let's say, 100 kids in a year. In order to do a model, you'd need 10, 20, 30 years, even to just do predictive modeling, but is this enough to do, is this enough to try and predict whether or not kids are going to finish my program or whether or not they're going to graduate high school? Probably not. I'll stop there and then see where we go.
So I think essentially what we're saying is that there is data, some data, but it's hard to access and aggregate. Is that essentially it? And that perhaps what data in the format that it's in, do you feel that it's right now, would that be reliable?
Okay, so I guess in general, my organization works with in building capacity in the nonprofit sector to use data. So our advice is generally do stuff at your capacity and what you're able to do. So the spreadsheet's not that bad. Probably what you need is someone to build a really good spreadsheet for you. So instead of having your address all in one thing, or having the names, a full name with Michael Smith in one thing, you have a first name and you have a last name, and then you have the house number, the street name, and then a postal code. Postal codes are great, but if it's mixed in with other things, then it's harder to analyze. So this is the data analyst side being really annoyed at someone's spreadsheet. But there are ways to make better spreadsheets that can then be imported into nice things if you happen to hire a data analyst to be able to do things. If you have that as well, right? So some organizations don't have to do that. But, and so I think some of the work that we do is about leveraging the data that's already available and figuring out what are the main questions that you need to answer to be able to do your work, and finding out whether or not that data exists somewhere else without you having to, track down the last 5 years of all your people participating in your after-school program, and instead trying to see if that information exists elsewhere. So there's a couple ways that nonprofits could do this, and it could be through this example won't, but through open data or through available data through the census. So if you just want, let's say you're a program and you're like, am I hitting the right target groups in my community? My neighborhood is changing a lot. I just want to know the demographics of my community. That stuff already exists through census data, for example. And then there's another level here where you can try and leverage access to administrative data. So administrative data is data that governments are collecting in their sort of everyday workings. So they know how much you make as, through your income taxes. They know what kind of degrees you have, what kind of jobs you have, whether or not you're in prison, things like that. And those are the results that you actually need, and the government has that kind of stuff, and how do you get access to that as a nonprofit? That's something that Powered by Data is working on in our Transform the Sector movement, which is probably a little more difficult, but it's not impossible. So imagine if you as a nonprofit could submit who your clients were based using a unique identifier, which I know Tina's gonna wanna talk about, meaning like, if you run an employment program and you want to know whether or not people are employed, you'll look at your SIN number. Everyone has an individual SIN number, so they can be linked up to the right people if you collect that information. And that the government or potentially a third party who might analyze this data can take that and give you back aggregated results on the relative success of your program. And that's an interesting way to take the you're going to have to collect some data, but take the onus of the data analysis out of your organization.
And I also want to just stay with you on a minute for a theme here actually about Transform the Sector that we had last year in Toronto. Because we talk a lot about aggregating client data to improve outcomes for people, and that is absolutely vital. But as nonprofits, we need to look at the whole enterprise, and that includes administrative data, finance data, and aggregating that so that we can create greater insights. So could you spend a few minutes on talking about what administrative data is, and what are these insights that not-for-profits could gain from aggregating that data and getting some insights?
Sure. So I'll give an example. That's probably the best way to do it. So this example is pulled from the UK, and it's called a justice lab. So for example, when, trying to think about the language around this, when people leave prison, they may participate in specific rehabilitation programs or reintegration programs, employment programs. And in general, these are meant to reduce recidivism, so repeat offenses. There was no way to measure whether or not any of these programs were successful because those nonprofits couldn't follow their clients and figure out whether or not they went back to prison. However, the government has this information. Everyone would have a prisoner number, and that prisoner number would follow you around if you entered back into prison. So the government would know whether or not you've gone back to prison, for how long, and where you were probably housed, something like that. And so they created a justice lab where community organizations, nonprofits participating in giving interventions to this clientele would submit their, the clients that participated in their programs using that unique identifier, collecting that information about that that prisoner number, for example, and give their individual level data to the government, and the government would then give them back the results on how many of their clients are now back in prison. And then they also collect this from numerous other organizations. So they're able to show you your success, not only as a percentage, so let's say 30% of your clients went back to prison, but also in comparison to other organizations who also submitted their data, and then as well to a control population that are not participating in programs. It's because they have all of this information about all their prisoners in their country. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Yep, great. And if there's any follow-up questions, we will have time at the end, so you can ask the panel questions. I am going to move it, now to Tina. So yesterday we heard a lot about tools to help with anxiety, depression, autism. So they were very much kind of disease specific. But I thought what you could do today is kind of bring it, to feel more natural for not-for-profits here to understand, through your example working with the Ottawa Food Bank, how data and a data project helped them.
Sure, I'd like to share one story we did. We talk about data not being cleansed. One of our clients was the Ottawa Food Bank. It's one of the largest food banks in Ottawa. Its actual primary job is to collect food to distribute to these smaller food banks, food cupboards, and kitchens around the city. So they're not open to the public per se. They're actually providing food to the agencies around the city. One of the things we were able to do, we did the usual, let's give them some descriptive information. They had 10 years worth of data. My data scientists kind of rubbed their hands and went, ooh. And we were able to identify for them a really neat heat map where we could show, here's all the food that you've been asked to deliver. And here's all the agencies. Now, they had too many agencies, so we had to manually categorize all the agencies. I went through all 120 of them, their websites, and determined what type of agency it was and made it into 5 categories. As a rule of thumb, for anybody out there, you don't want more than 7 categories. Okay, after that it's... And if you want to know why, talk to me afterwards. But 7 is about the max. 5 is really good for annual reports, executive consumption. It's just kind of a general, see, I got nods here, right? So I ended up taking all this stuff down to 5. So imagine if there's an opportunity, I've got a picture of it actually on my stick, was to say, here's all the food, here's the different categories, and red means there's a gap, and green means you're good. And they were able to look at it, and the director just went, wow. It's like being a parent and finding out what your teenagers are up to. Because he hadn't had this insight before, because they were so busy at getting food on trucks. All they really had time for was to look at the data for what do I need to deliver today, or maybe last quarter, or what I could do for this year for the annual report, to give a report back to the board of directors. To see this view over a 10-year period was just, wow. And we could share with them the changes in the demand over time. They didn't know, for example, they had a demand for adult diapers that had gone unmet for 5 years. And they said, why would anybody ask a food bank for adult diapers? But it just shows a degree of desperation that some of these agencies have trying to meet the demands of their clients that they're dealing with on, firsthand. Another one we were able to say, you know what, you've done a great job collecting diapers for children under the age of 5, and particularly under the age of 2. By looking at some of the census data, we correlated the postal codes are important, by the way. So they actually had the postal code in a field. We took those postal codes and mapped them to the the wards for the city of Ottawa. And we could say for this particular ward, you probably are giving diapers to about 30% of all the children under the age of 2 for that ward. And the director was like, wow, now I have a talking point to talk to my city councillor and talk about funding and the impact we're having on his particular ward.
There's your example.
Oh yeah, there's my example.
Yeah, so if you want to just talk to that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. Sorry, I love this stuff. Well, one that came up was desserts, for example. That not all of them, unfortunately, the annotation didn't come through. But desserts is kind of in the middle there. You can see it's really dark green on the one end, but kind of red on this end. And he's like, oh, all we have to do is like they're over by 17,000 or 13,000 desserts for multi-service and 5,000 for meal programs. All we have to do is redistribute where we're delivering desserts, and we can make the community food cupboards and the food cupboards more satisfy their demands, as an example. We dug down into dairy. Dairy in particular had yogurt being missed. And so they're like, oh, we can now, when we use our monies to go buy milk, maybe we'll buy more yogurt. And this is particularly for a couple of centers that help teenage mothers so they could give better food for their children. The other one that the director pointed out, which we didn't know, and this is where, to be honest, AI can only help so much. There's only so much data that's quantitative. We need qualitative, business acumen to interpret the results. And this is where, when we talk about the ethical aspects of AI, how do we make sure we breathe humanity into our numbers? So when you look at the middle part where you see it says KS After, those are actually Kickstart programs or the after-school programs. And one of the arrangements the food bank had with the province of Ontario was to help bridge food deliveries to after-school programs until that after-school program was properly funded. The wheels of government move slowly, so it takes a while for that funding to kind of come through once they've made the decision to put in a program. And so what he's like, we shouldn't be delivering that much food to them at this point. They're up and running, they've been going for 3 years. Our commitment to them is fulfilled. So he was like excited to have this information because now he could go back to those the after-school program administrators and say, look, it's time we wean you off, because we want to move these food deliveries, these numbers represent cases of food, by the way, to other programs where we still have unmet demand that represent a higher risk population.
And obviously looking at this, if you're the executive director of this organization, you realize now you have kind of a quantitative claim for an ask for more fruits, more legumes. You can point to data instead of just having a general ask.
That's true. It also shows that just some logistics around it. They have to, and these are perishable items. We actually had a farmer, this is as a segue, a farmer donated land to the food bank so they could grow vegetables in the summer. So one of the volunteer activities was to have people help harvest the vegetables in the fall and make sure they get distributed.
Great, thank you so much for the example. Jean-Louis, you have something to follow up on, and then I have a question to ask you as well.
I think this is a really, really great example of a context of a set of problems that can then be identified through data analysis, right? So like making the work that Data for Good is like really amazing because of that, because of the kind of the engagement with the social sector and nonprofits that are sitting on or using data, maybe not to the maximum extent that they could. And in my mind, when I look at this, I'm like, okay, there's like a number of like logistical challenges, right? So how do you get the reds to the green? But then there's also like the regulation behind it. Mm-hmm. So then what's the story behind that? What are the barriers to be able to resolve these types of problems? Because in my mind, this is a really great exercise in problem framing. Mm-hmm. And then how do we then kind of look at the barriers for actually changing the way that those logistical issues are being kind of controlled by a set of guidelines, rules, right, that limit the way that we can actually act in the public interest, right? And so I think when we talk about systems that we need to change, regulation, laws, and like these types of like policies, like we need to be able to give ourselves the space, like call it like a regulatory sandbox, right? So that we have like an opening to be able to innovate in creative ways to actually change the system, to look at opportunities that would enable us to mitigate some of these issues and get us into thinking about kind of predicting this type of behavior and then anticipating in a much more fair and equal way. So I think once you start kind of creating these types of sandbox, you're actually, and there's models for this in like Singapore and other places where you need to have like a values-driven way of looking at the way that you're actually looking at data, but from a regulatory perspective. And sometimes regulation and policy isn't necessarily the sexiest thing to talk about, and you want to be able to kind of showcase, you know, great like predictive analysis and models and things like that. But it's really the rules that set the parameters of the type of conversation that you can have that kind of limits, you know, or creates certain barriers to your imagination. And I think, you know, regulation is a key thing. I've got another point that I want to make, but I know you wanted to ask another point.
Yes, I do, because I think, you know, having worked with nonprofits for 25 years, having been a former executive director myself, I know that we operate with 12 hats and in silos. And every year we have more requirements, administrative burden for reporting, maybe static funding, maybe performance-based funding. It's becoming quite difficult, you know, to run a not-for-profit. And then you see data like this and you realize, you know what, I can't do this all myself. Because, and as you said, in great segue, this suggests that there are other partnerships, other stakeholders that need to be connected. And so I'm remembering a conversation that we had where you were very excited about a multi-stakeholder partnership or model. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is something that we did with the Quartier des Spectacles, which I know Viet is here and, as our partner for this process. So this was working with the Quartier des Spectacles and the members of the Partenariat. After a series of proofs of concept, working with a partner to be able, with AIIA, that lent, I think, 200 different analysts from the cultural sector and the different partners of the Quartier des Spectacles to say, share your data, let's identify some themes to see what's possible. And then you had 200 analysts that kind of crunch numbers frantically over, you know, like a hackathon type of model of like 2 or 3 days, and then came up with, you know, proofs of demonstrations of how data could tell a story or kind of address some of those issues. And so that was a great kind of start to a process that then kind of created an opening to say, all right, how do we then kind of take a step back and then negotiate and broker an understanding of what are these common interests that we share if we were to share our data. And we're not going to agree that we have the same priorities on everything, but where's the overlap so that we can create a process and a protocol and actually a data sharing governance model whereby we're kind of, you know, willingly sharing our data, creating these unique identifiers so that we can actually start looking at creating analysis that benefits kind of those stakeholders as a whole. And so we ended up with a policy that actually discusses and describes in detail the roles and responsibilities, the protocols, the decision-making process in a very kind of detailed way. And we're only able to do that after the proof of concepts, but then also kind of having a recognition that we have more to win and to gain by sharing data than we do with our own internal capacity to actually produce that type of analysis. And that's actually something where we're actually renegotiating and creating an intersection between interests and values. And I think that kind of shared data governance model, and of which there's a few examples that are kind of emerging right now, is something that, sure, this is for the Partenariat des Quartiers des Spectacles, but it's totally replicable in other contexts for other types of dynamics, other types of stakeholders, you know. And what we're actually learning right now is, you know, I've been doing open data for, you know, almost like 12 years now. It's like I'm now in a position of negotiating and mediating these types of conversations, which is not what I started off as, more as an advocate and kind of openness, we need an open data policy. Now it's more about brokering interests around like a set of shared values.
And this is multi-stakeholder, so including government and the social sector.
Yeah, so the social sector could then have like complementary data that could be added to it, but this is mainly around the partnership members from the cultural industry.
Excellent. Okay, Leslie, I see you want to jump in.
So, Betty, you've mentioned the Transform the Sector from Powered by Data, and I think this is just some of the work that we've been doing is around accessing, nonprofits being able to access administrative data to measure what the results are, which have benefits for being able to benchmark, as well as being able to evaluate their services and see how they can improve by looking at other people who are doing better than them, or who have better success rates, let's say. And so this involves, right now we're in the process of doing that stakeholder engagement with different stakeholders groups, including funders and governments, nonprofit organizations, and representatives of direct beneficiaries. So those direct groups that are going to be affected by some of these policies, and trying to figure out some of the best ways in which they can create these data sharing agreements, right? So I mentioned the UK model, and that's something that they've come up with, but will this work in the same context in Canada, depending on what issue can come forward, and where those, which groups have the most incentives to gain, the most to gain from this. So there's also being involved in trying to engage the nonprofit sector in this conversation, so that they are defining how their data is shared and how they collect that information, and also creating policies in terms of how they communicate that to their direct beneficiaries, so that they also know that they're gaining benefits from this data work being done.
Thank you. Okay, so now I have a question for all of you. So what tips or advice do you have for not-for-profits or for governments in becoming data-centric organizations? Because embedded within that is more than just an Excel sheet. There's culture, there's leadership, there's strategy. So we'll start with Jonathan, and we'll work our way down. How's that? What are your tips, Jonathan?
First, I think they need to realize that in the world we're living now, making decisions based on intuition, or because we're doing that, it's like historical way of doing things, needs to change. You've seen a great example here in Ottawa, what happens when you start looking at the data, and now you can say, oh my God, maybe we should change the way our operation is working. So I think that's only that will allow a lot and unlock a lot of a new way of doing things into nonprofit organization. By saying that is like, not only like starting to look into maybe hiring people with data set skills that will be necessary in the future, or also for nonprofit to reach university or other organizations such as AIIA or others that doing data philanthropy, data for goods. IBM is part of that too with Watson, etc. So a lot of company or a lot of students are willing to help as well. We need to create maybe that bridge. Yesterday I was here when someone from Quotient Social, I think, was there presenting. I was amazed by this presentation and what is just recently launched, because it will allow for probably the smallest nonprofit organization to have someone go there and help them with their data and start building stuff. Because I think Leslie was right. A lot of them are not in a position to start doing even like descriptive analytics. Mm-hmm. We're talking about changing our system to allow like real-time analytics. But believe me, a lot of nonprofits are not there. And but just by creating this awareness of like, hey, should we start basing our decision with facts? Mm. That's something you should start with. To have also maybe to have data strategy. So how I'm collecting my data, for what reason, what I should do with this data, who owns the data here. So data collection, data literacy, it's very important too, as well.
Great, thank you. Jean-Louis, tips for nonprofits or governments?
Or governments? Or both, that's fine. I'm not scared of that. I mean, I think you touched on some really key issues here, and in my mind, what came out is like the notion of experimentation, and to embrace that through like iterative approaches of kind of, doing small steps and looking what potentially you could do, and really kind of naming kind of perceived risks and perceived barriers, and kind of really kind of having a strong kind of diagnostic of like, okay, are we really, is this a real risk that we're actually facing in sharing data or working with data? Where are the blockages? Where are the capacity needs? Where is the infrastructure? Where's the actual mindset shifts that we actually need to put in place? And who leads? How do we empower inside organizations? So that's inside nonprofits, there's a real need for a conversation that can be aided and assisted by other types of stakeholders. And to the broader point though about government, because I think we also need to have maybe a little bit more empathy for government itself, and the way that the type of conversation that we're having today is also hugely disruptive inside of government, and we're actually seeing that kind of transformation that's taking place inside government. And I think one a note here is let's look at the opportunities that are ahead of us, right? And how do we then create these opportunities and leverage these opportunities to convene and really build on the strengths that we have here in Montreal, for example. And one example here is, look at the Smart City Challenge, right? Big investment by the federal government, Infrastructure Canada, and as soon as I think of the Smart City Challenge, I think of Sidewalk Labs. And I'm not sure who here in the room is familiar with Sidewalk Labs, right? So in Toronto, Alphabet creates a partnership with, or actually has an agreement with the City of Toronto to take basically ownership and control over public land to build a city, to build a neighborhood. When you read the document, the vision piece of Alphabet, it's like poetry, It's like beautiful, beautiful, beautiful language. It's really nice, and there are many, many things that are very ambitious and visionary in that document. But then you have to ask those value-driven questions behind it. For whom, with whom, and then you look at Montreal and you say, well, actually, this is an opportunity for us, because we don't need to go in that direction. There's an opportunity to create an alternative to Sidewalk Lab that builds on our own strengths in terms of our social cohesion and social coherence and the values that we have, and then how do we look at these types of issues around regulation that I mentioned before. And so nonprofits should be involved in this. They actually have a direct stake, finally, because they have the context of the types of challenges and the problems that we need to actually factor into the opportunities that we want to build through these big investments. So they really need to be at the core, not at the periphery. They need to be at the core of how we define the problems through these big investments that we're making right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am from Toronto, as Valentine mentioned, and aware of the Sidewalk Labs. It's hard not to be. And what you refer to as being the visionary statement is the only thing that actually is transparent. The actual full RFP document in the terms and their rights is actually not transparent, and even the board of directors, one of which is a city councillor, has been asking for transparency on that and has been challenged through that process. And that data, of course, is collected of individuals that nonprofits need to know in terms of what's happening in that community and the data that reflects those individuals to support them. But at this point in time, it's not clear in terms of whether they will actually have the ability to share that data. So we do need to be involved in the conversation. Thank you for that. Tina, I know you have advice for government. So please do share.
Anyone here from government? Quick show of hands.
They may not show their hands now, but come on, it's okay. We're all one family.
All right, just a quick one for government. For government, to make it useful for your data useful to nonprofits, make sure that anything to do with time and location is 100% standardized. Because I can't tell you how much data we've had, and even something as simple as a date, you'd be surprised how many formats it can come in. And if somebody has to spend, if you've only got a couple hours and you spend an hour of that time just getting a date sorted out, it doesn't give you a lot of incentive to work on the more complex problems that come along, and you just physically run out of time. People just get worn out. So that's my short, because there's not a lot of hands here for government. On the nonprofit side, I would encourage anybody who's to look at your mission statement, your objectives, and say, how am I measuring success in my organization? And really work from a top-down point of view, from your data collection and your data management, rather than bottom-up. It's easy to collect surveys. It's easy to collect other stuff. But, there's other ways of, but when you look top-down, it's often, Leslie was talking about impact. If you're not collecting the right type of data, it's extremely difficult then to have even a glimmer of hope to figure out what your impact is after the fact. One example we worked with was the Uville Center in Ottawa, where it's a phenomenal organization. They help teenage mothers complete their high school education. And because this tends to be a very high-risk population, they also provide addiction counseling, parenting skills, a whole bunch of additional skills in the afternoons so that they can become better parents and hopefully thriving, productive adults as they mature along with their kids. I mean, some of these teenagers are only 15, 16 years old, and they're raising a child. But they didn't know about their donor population. And so they asked our group, Data for Good, to help them understand their donor population. But they hadn't collected enough data for us to do things like, are their donors aging out, for example? That was one of the questions they had. They were concerned that the decline of their individual donors was due to their donor population becoming older, and they weren't attracting a younger population. But literally all we had was a name and an amount. They can't do a whole lot, which is, if you just do something through PayPal or something, that's all you would collect. But we were able to, though, look at their data, because they had collected it over time, to say, you know what, you have about 100 donors that have been donating for 10 years or longer. And they were stunned, because this was a group that had donated, let's say, anywhere from $30 to $50 in a year, so they weren't big donors. But the fact that they hadn't looked at their data over time, I'll call it that stickiness, it gave them an opportunity to look at measuring the success of their fundraising programs around repeat donors. And it was an angle they hadn't considered before. So that's just an example of, look at some of the things that your business, I mean, a nonprofit is a altruistic business, of what is going to define your success, and how am I measuring that success so that you can understand what levers you want to pull and where you want to direct your energy in the end. So if you want to have big donors, what this fundraising committee had done is they had gone after corporate donors, and that was the real reason why the decline in individual donors had gone down, because their attention had shifted with that policy change. But that got them more money, but they were disenfranchising a very important part of their demographic that they wanted to retain. So now they had an opportunity to revisit how they wanted to basically achieve their fundraising objectives, and how to basically look at some qualitative aspects to round it out. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for sharing that example. Leslie, you have your own mic, so tip, and then I want to open it up so we have at least 10 minutes of question and answers from the audience as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I won't repeat in terms of what both Tina and Jonathan have said about data strategies, but that I guess in terms of facing your own reality as nonprofits, is that oftentimes your reporting or the data that you collect is often dependent on what your funders are asking for. So we know that this is a challenge for you, but that there are ways for you to accomplish that as well as set your own purposes for your data. Be purposeful in your data collection, and not just responding to what funders want to know, because their needs may not line up with you, and which then goes to Jean-Noé's point in terms of like, how do we get everybody on board for the same type of thing? This is a bigger project. In terms of for governments, it's sort of the same advice in terms of collecting information sort of on a minimal basis, getting as much bang for your buck kind of thing. So that government collects often, if you go to different departments, they're actually not sharing data between each other. But we know that linking data is certainly possible. So for example, Canadians, if you, on your census, when you're filling out your census, you can check a box that says, do you want to link your census data to your income data? And you then don't have to fill out all this other stuff and all this other income data, and then it's actually more accurate than probably what you would have reported yourself. It's the exact number of your taxable income. So governments also need to figure out how they share data within government and across governments, as well as thinking about how they share it with their stakeholders in the nonprofit community. And so they're talking about this administrative data again. But that also talking to your stakeholders and figuring out what kind of data that you might have that they might find useful, and figuring out ways to share that data with them, whether or not it's through open data or through administrative data or through another facet.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate. Please welcome our panel and thank them for their input. So I've heard from The Voice, which is Valentine, that we're not going to have Q&A now. We're going to have Q&A after the break. So have a wonderful break. Come back and ask as many questions as you like. Okay? Thank you.